Welcome on in to the Utah Blockcast second episode. Today, unfortunately, this is not the one I wanted to record. Tonight, breaking news came down that Utah's Noam Yaacov has been ruled ineligible for the 2026-27 season, and Noam Yaacov will now pursue other opportunities. Likely headed to the G League or perhaps going back to the international waters. But on a day where a former NBA player, RJ Louise, played with the Boston Celtics, the Utah Jazz, was able to join the LSU Tigers, Noam Yaacov was ruled ineligible. It makes no sense. it makes no sense. NFL players, there are players currently in the NFL. DeQuan Wright of the Cleveland Browns just played in a game with the Browns over the weekend, is now committed to LSU. It just does not make sense. There are some players who have gained a fifth year of eligibility. There are other players from the same class, played all 4 years, just like some of those other guys, that are not deemed eligible for a fifth year. Make it make sense. Anyways, Utah basketball dealt a brutal blow with Noam Yaacov being ruled ineligible. This is a tough one. This is arguably the most painful loss that could have happened to Utah basketball this season. Yaacov was the guy that Utah built this team around. So it's not easy. It is not an easy one to deal with for Utah, but I want to dive into all of that. I want to dive into where Utah pivoted, who they pivoted to, talk about who needs to step up, those types of things. So just a quick little recap of what's transpired here. Need to record something to have it on the feed. So again, August 24th, Noam Yaacov was ruled ineligible. He was the player that Utah made their big priority this offseason as they look to rebuild this roster and this program. He was the centerpiece to all of their roster building efforts. And, he was the guy that was viewed as the engine to this 2026 roster. And so, unfortunately, him being ruled ineligible, again, is just a super tough blow. And the specific basis for the NCAA's decision to not make him eligible has not been made clear just yet. So this is a tough one, but this has been Utah has been going through this process of trying to get Noam Yaacov deemed eligible since before he was signed. I know that they've appealed and exhausted all of their options when it comes to appealing and those types of things. In talking to people, Utah put in a lot of time and effort to try and get this figured out and sorted out so that Noam Yaacov could officially join and officially play this season. And unfortunately, those efforts fell on deaf ears with the NCAA. So while all of that was going on, Utah did not sit idly by. They began to put together contingency plans in the event that Utah would not be able to get him eligible. And if you remember, when it first became apparent that class of 2022 players would be granted a fifth year, there were immediately basketball players that began to enter the portal or see, I guess, where their I shouldn't say eligibility, either entered the portal and started to gain interest from other programs And early on in this process, there was a name that Utah was linked to. It was Doug McDaniel, a Kansas State point guard, and Utah put in their due diligence on a number of different players, a number of options. They had options. You can assume that Dallin Hall was one of those options as well. And so Utah trying to figure out, and I don't know that for certain. I just know that Doug McDaniel was because it was reported by somebody, but I can't confirm that Dallin Hall was one of those options. But Utah put together contingency plans, and ultimately they landed on Trey Campbell, the Northern Iowa point guard who was named Mountain West or Missouri Valley Tournament most outstanding player, the Missouri Valley Conference Tournament's most outstanding player this past season. He was named to the league's all defensive team and earned second team all Missouri Valley Conference honors as well after a season in which he averaged 13 and a half points, nearly 4 assists, nearly 4 rebounds, and over 1.5 steals per game last season, and had a fantastic postseason run in the NCAA tournament for Northern Iowa as well. So, Campbell comes with credentials. This is obviously not a direct replacement for Yaacov and what he brought to the table. And I think that's important to kind of distinguish up front. With Yaacov, Utah is just going to lose, lead guard creation, the ability to make plays with the ball in his hands for himself and for others, where his ability off the dribble was just so unique. He played the game in such a creative manner. I think it obviously drew a lot of excitement from Utah fans, the sort of excitement that hasn't been felt in quite a while. And so unfortunately, Utah isn't going to be able to replace that sort of ability and that sort of creativity on ball. But I think when you talk about Campbell, there is a little bit more balance to his game where he may not be the offensive engine, the offensive creator that Noam Yaacov is and could have been. But what you're trading off there, you're gaining on the defensive end. And I think that is where Utah is going to have to lean into this season and make significant strides. They brought in TJ Birch, who also was, I believe, the SoCon Valley Defensive Player of the Year, was at least on the defensive all-conference team as well. So Utah now has a couple of guards in Campbell and Birch that have found success creating, for themselves offensively, creating for others offensively, while also being pretty effective on the defensive end of the floor. So in terms of what they've brought in from the transfer portal, Utah bringing in Birch and Campbell, you can kind of see the identity that Utah is trying to lean into now when they don't have that dynamic play creator. So it's going to look a little bit different. The offense is obviously going to have to adjust and adapt without that on-ball creator. But again, with Campbell, the experience is significant. 4 years at Northern Iowa, a lot of success during those 4 years, a lot of games played. He has a ton of experience, and after his postseason run this past season, had the opportunity to sign with the Minnesota Timberwolves as part of their summer league team, and that's going to be a valuable experience for him. So, for Utah, you're still bringing in somebody in Campbell that has credentials, that has experience and production to his name. It is just going to be, it's just going to be packaged a little bit differently with Campbell. But you're adding size, you're adding ability to score on the ball and off the ball. He was an efficient shooter. His best shooting year came 2 years ago, where he was, I believe, a 43% shooter from deep. He was 35% this past season. And so there's ability there. Now, it's not going to be entirely contingent upon, Campbell and Birch. I think without Yaacov in place, Lucas Longarita now becomes much more valuable and much more important to this season's plans than before. And it's important to understand last season, Lucas coming into last year's team as a mid-year guy, that not only can be a difficult situation to come into. I've talked with enough people to feel comfortable saying that it was a difficult situation for him to come into. And not only was it difficult in the sense that Utah was struggling and there was a lot of excitement about this mid-year guy and it just didn't fit, didn't mesh with the current roster, but Longarita himself was kind of dealing with a little bit of rust when he first joined the program. Then he suffers an injury. There was a complication along the way with his injury and just sort of prolonging his timetable to return. Ultimately, he returns in time for the Big 12 tournament. And again, just kind of given the time being off the court, being away from practice and not being able to, play with the sort of chemistry and just a rhythm, looked rough in the Big 12 tournament. But, in talking to people about Longarita, expectations and their belief in Longarita as a player and as a playmaker are still high. And I think him having the offseason now with the program under Alex Jensen, I think that has to mean something even more now without Yaacov in place. So Utah has some guards that still offer some playmaking here. Again, it's going to be packaged a little bit differently where you can't just rely on one dynamic point guard to create for everybody. But I think there's still enough here where Alex Jensen and this staff can go in and kind of figure some things out. Beyond those three, you're obviously going to need all of the other pieces to kind of come together. You're going to need Tayson Chapman to be that sort of shooter he needs to be. You need Jackson Holcomb to be that sort of Alex Caruso of this squad. And then, where this team I think is going to feel the most noticeable difference between this year and last year is in the front court. And there's a lot of confidence and optimism in Alec Enigbata and what he can bring to the table. He's coming here as a 20-year-old true freshman, so he's going to have time to develop over the course of his career. But then, beyond Enigbata, who is, going to be a 6'8", 6'9", 220-pound forward, you bring back Jackson Johnson, who returned from his church mission. You bring in Zati Lubaki, who is someone that I know probably would have challenged for a starting role last year on last year's squad, which, again, knowing last year's squad, it maybe isn't saying the most, but it says something. And Zati Lubaki, again, at 6'9", he's got a 7'2" wingspan. He's athletic. He adds a little bit of versatility where he can play some 4, some 5, maybe some 3 in some really big lineups. But where it's going to feel particularly different is at that 5 spot. And Utah bringing back Babacar Faye, who, is going to be really important at 6'9". He also has a 7+ foot wingspan. That's going to add to the rim protection a little bit. You bring in Malik Goma from Weber State, who I think, maybe isn't the athlete that James Okonkwo was, but there's certainly more skill and feel for the game than what Okonkwo brought to the table. And then there's still Finn Schott, who, as I've talked with people over the last couple of days, this is nearing the finish line. This is close to being finalized. It's just a matter of time before he's officially announced as an addition to this roster. And I think he is going to be a really intriguing player for Utah basketball this season. I think, he's listed at anywhere, he's listed, depending on where you go, 6'8", 6'9". I'm curious to see what he checks in weight-wise. I think comfortably you can say he looks like a 240-pound player. I wouldn't be surprised if he's closer to 250, maybe 255. He is a big body. And with the way that he rebounds, with the way that he plays inside, he's just going to add some ruggedness to this, along with Malik Goma, which just wasn't present last year. And then when you look at his production, and he's played, internationally for the last couple of years, some really good numbers, some really encouraging numbers beyond just the rebounding. He's averaging a double-double, I think, in certain tournaments at 13 points, 13, double-digit rebounds. But what's really intriguing about Shot is the assist numbers. He's getting 3, 4 assists per game. And I think having that in a big man really kind of speaks to their feel for the game and what they bring to the table in that sense. So, yeah, this is tough because, again, just kind of circling back to all of this, Noam Yaacov being ruled ineligible is just a brutal blow for Utah. There's no two ways about it. But I think this staff deserves credit for having contingency plans in place, for landing a player in Trey Campbell, who I think is not maybe appreciated enough right now. I go to evanmia.com for basketball analytics. He's got a transfer portal ranking where, he has Keanu Dawes as like the number 51 player in the transfer portal class. Flory Badunga as the number 1 player. He has Jackson Holcomb as the number 37 player in the class. He has TJ Birch as the number 221 player in the class, and this includes 3,000 players that entered the transfer portal this season. Trey Campbell, number 81 in his transfer portal rankings. So just to kind of give you an idea, I think Campbell brings a lot to the table. And there's a lot off. There's enough offensively where you can feel good that he's going to be able to come in, run a system, but there's really a lot to like about what he brings to the defensive end of the floor, which I think having Birch already in place as a defensive guy, I think is really encouraging. So again, tough, really tough. Utah fans are going to be feeling this one for a while. But for Utah basketball, you just kind of have to keep it moving. You gotta, you gotta keep it moving. And I think this is going to be obviously a really important season. But with this just inexplicable ruling from the NCAA, given everything else that's going on in college athletics, the fact that Noam Yaacov has been ruled ineligible is just baffling to me. Given some of the other things that we've seen, especially over the last couple of weeks. So, man, tough blow. Utah is going to have to figure it out on the fly. And I think there are some pieces here that guys that are in place that have to step up more so than before. But I think Utah's, they've got their work cut out for them for sure. And, just you feel for Alex, you feel for Wes. It's a tough blow to have your centerpiece out of the equation like this. Going to have to go to the drawing board, on the recruiting trail, figure out where you can pivot there to bring in, a big piece for next year. Utah is going to be done, once Finn's shot is announced. That will make the roster finalized. That'll finalize the roster's shots edition. And again, that is expected to come here soon. So, man, tough blow for Utah fans. Tough blow for Utah basketball. Man, hope to have more on this and much more with Utah basketball and Utah football the rest of the week. If you guys have questions about Utah basketball or Utah football, maybe we'll do a mailbag episode this week. We'll dive into some things. But yeah, this is a tough conversation, tough recording for me. I'm struggling to find the words myself to end the show because, yeah, just tough. So I'm going to just press stop and, yeah.